Does it work? Yes, it works. So I'm Paolo Lucente. Once in a while, I don't have to apologize that sorry for my Italian English, because even if I know English, it will work. And I have like 30 slides for 30 minutes, so the level of brutality will be quite consistent. So let's get started. So this is me, nice photo from a few years back. I'm Paolo, and I work with, trying to get the data out of networks for, many, many years. Before I started the CNR here in Italy, and then moved across some service providers around, and currently I am working for a well-known vendor that starts with the C and ends with the O, and we are not going to mention that. And I have also Twitter for less than 1 month, and I'm currently in that Zlatan Ibrahimovic kind of syndrome, where I don't follow anybody, but people follow me. But I will start, gradually, trying to add people. So thanks very much. So PMSCCT. So this presentation will be divided in 2 parts, and it's like PMSCCT is the first part. So just to introduce you what this tool is. I am the creator and author of PMSCCT, and then in the second part I had a possibility to play a little bit with streaming telemetry, which is some buzzword that all the vendors will try to sell you in the forthcoming months and years. And so, and I will cover that a little bit from a more social and community perspective than technical. I mean, the vendors will have the best technical information from you. So that said, does it work, this thing? How does it work? Myself and technology really doesn't work. So yeah, so PMSCCT is that thing that is in the middle. Actually, this is the slide where you can see why the logo of PMSCCT is an octopus, because it's connecting very different things. And the eye of the octopus is angry, a little bit angry, because nobody knows how to pronounce that bloody name, PMSCCT. So I mean, the octopus is angry. So essentially what you have over there, and you can see essentially, is that you have several data sources like libpickup, netflow, sflow, or now streaming telemetry. You feed this data into PMSCCT. You can correlate it with other data sources like BGP, BMP, or IGP, or maps, so you can provide other data, external data, right? You can, combine all of this. PMSCCT can do that on the fly for you if you want. And then you can dump all of this data on, on backends, right? So you have popular open source relational databases like MySQL, PostgreSQLite, NoSQL databases, flat files, brokers, message brokers, which is a buzzword today, RabbitMQ and Kafka, or memory tables. And other than collecting this information and combining it, PMSCCT could also be a probe, so you can sniff traffic and export it as sflow or netflow or IPFix, or replicate or a replicator. So you have the whole tool set, like a collection, replication, and exporting. So what would be a few? You can, so it's free open source tool, so you can just go to the web page over there and you can check it out, and if you have any problems, you pay me some drinks and we can speak. So that said, without the drinks, I don't know if that works, but I'm just saying. So what would be a few simple use cases, right? So you have, so as I was saying, it could be a collector. So you have a netflow and dump it to flat files, or it could be a replicator, like so you would send sflow to PMSCCT and then you replicate it, or you can receive BMP, BGP monitoring protocol data and then send all the data onto a Kafka bus to third-party applications, or still, again, what I was saying before, it could be a probe. So you sniff the traffic and you export it with IPFix. And then you can do also a few more complicated things, because as I was saying, you can do correlation of stuff. So for example, you can have netflow and IPFix, and you can have BGP over here. So you, for example, give data to to NFACCTD, which is the daemon. You can replicate this traffic, and then at the very same time you can correlate with BGP, and then you can define several aggregation methods, like 2 of them, and you can dump, all of this data to flat files and to MySQL. And on top of it, for example, you may want to do some analytics against the BGP and with some other external tool, and so you want to deliver traffic with Kafka to this tool, and that's just purely BGP data, right? So you can do, you have a toolbox and you can do all this kind of combination together. So yet again, I mean, use cases, there are a lot, you can read them over there, and but this is to say that there are several segments that are, covered by PMSCCT. So you have mobile operators, vendors, so for SDN solutions. SDN was not mentioned today once, so I am the first one, and it's already afternoon, come on, yes. So in any case, so IP carriers, CDNs, OTTs, and things like that. So some non-technical facts about the project. It's more than 10 years. I really started it when I was still in Italy at the CNR, and where they invited me to go away together with the tool, and so I did. And then it comes with this name that you cannot really spell after the second drink, and that is really a problem. But it's free, open source, and independent, so it is not affiliated with any vendor or anything like that. It's under development. There is innovation being introduced, like this streaming telemetry thing that we will speak later. And it's well deployed around, also in very large service providers around the world. And since myself, I come from the service provider community, I hope that it's always the kind of tool that is closer to the service providers, because I come from there, I know the needs, sometimes I try to anticipate the needs and things like that. So technical facts, so it's a pluggable architecture where you have, like we saw before, data sources and backends, and it's there is an abstraction layer in the middle, and it's rather easy if you are if you are a C programmer to let's say plug new data sources or new backends in. And then, as I was saying, you can correlate all of this stuff together. And you have very important pervasive data reduction techniques. Why is that? Because networks really dump a lot of data onto you, and so if you try just to store everything to the disk, it's a little bit what Luca was just saying before. You cannot really go there. So you need data reduction techniques like aggregation. Aggregation is a big thing in PMSCCT, or filtering, or sampling. So the idea of PMSCCT, still summarizing from the previous slides, is that you can, collect your traffic, so your BGP or your net flow or your traffic once, and you can, do several things with it. You can, build multiple views out of it, so something from which you can, build reports that are good, to be presented to just to build reports like a peering matrix or something like that. Or you can also do, and in parallel, you can have also a fully deaggregated way, or rather deaggregated way, with which you can do other things, I don't know, anti-DDoS or whatever. And then at the very same time, like I was saying, you can do analytics against the different components. So not with PMSCCT, but it's the enabler to do the analytics, because you have the shipping through the message buses and things like that. So we start with the second part of the presentation, which is the streaming telemetry. So first of all, why I'm speaking streaming telemetry? Because I had the opportunity to play with streaming telemetry in PMSCCT, so I had some exposure to it. And so for who has heard about streaming telemetry? Yup. Okay, very good. Okay, something. Okay, very good, very good. So we are bleeding edge. Nobody knows about streaming telemetry. So what is streaming telemetry? So all of you, I think, in your networks, you are collecting data with SNMP, and you know that with SNMP, you are polling the devices, right? So streaming telemetry would like to be a new incarnation, let's say, of SNMP, by which essentially you are not polling the devices, but the devices are streaming you the data, right? So it's a push mechanism rather than a poll kind of mechanism, right? And so that is essentially what is written on the Cisco IOS-XR telemetry configuration guide. There is another definition from who created, let's say, streaming telemetry, which is the OpenConfig, OpenConf or OpenConfig consortium, but that is a little bit a metaphysical description, so I prefer to summarize it with the Cisco one. So what is the relation between streaming telemetry and PMSCCT? So you have two main use cases. One is that you collect data with this PM telemetry D, the streaming telemetry coming from the routers. And then essentially, yet again, you can just send it to flat files or to Kafka. And then doing a little bit more, let's say, complicated use case, essentially you can start correlating like NetFlow with streaming telemetry, right? So let's give a simple use case of that, right? So you know that NetFlow is sampled and it will tend to undercount, right? So whenever you take SNMP data and you take NetFlow data will always give you a figure that is less than the SNMP one. And so with streaming telemetry, like you remember, we were saying we can get the same data that you can get from SNMP, like interface counters, right? So you can normalize, for example, the NetFlow data to match with the SNMP, with the streaming telemetry data with the interface counters, and then you can, work out a rescaling factor, for example, right? So that is where streaming telemetry in correlation with the NetFlow or IPFix, comes very interesting. And now, which will take, I have a rant, so that is finishing. So 2 slides on streaming telemetry, now there is the rant, the social community part of this, which will take all the rest of the slides. So, so it has been a very interesting experience for me to work on this. Why is that? Because if you think about standardization and streaming telemetry, it's like that, like that. So there is just some standardization. So can you imagine that you have, let's say, you want to transport, so you have data and then the transport of the data. So the way in which the data modeling, so the data itself, is being standardized, and there are, there is a lot of drafts nowadays also at ITF and things like that. So they are defining what is an interface, what is, how, all the things that we already went through with SNMP. I mean, we are repeating them, and that is okay. But then, like what I was saying before, then the data, you have still to transport it, right? So you have to. We are saying you have a streaming mechanism here. So somehow you have to subscribe to the data, right? So because you don't want just to receive every data that a router has. For example, you can say I want CPU counters and I want interface counters, but I'm not interested into RSVP data or MPLS data or anything like that. So you should be able to do that. So you should subscribe and specify all of that. And this is where the standardization part is really lacking, right? Or it's totally absent, right? So you have very little work. And the typical answer is that, that's just the transport. We are cool, we care about the data. So I'm, maybe it's because I'm collecting data for more than 10 years, and I've wrote PMSCCT or started writing PMSCCT between 10 and 15 years ago. I'm not really convinced about, the fact that data just spontaneously migrates from a router to a collector and then still magically gets decoded and things like that, right? That doesn't, it's not precisely like that. So I'm not convinced that you should only standardize the data part of it. You should also take care of all the ancillary mechanisms around it. So let's get even closer to the point, right? So I am myself from service providers, and then so if there is a mantra, is that the service providers, they are not engaged or not engaged enough in ITF. So I believe in that mantra, like so operators should go to ITF, should participate in ITF, and things like that. So you are from you represent operators from Italy. How many of you go to ITF? 1, 2, and how many are engaged? I mean, you are not from. You don't count. Yeah, you were cheating. So, okay, and how many of you are subscribed to at least one ITF mailing list? Okay, so we are very, 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 very little, right? And so, so that should, hey, Google. No, okay, no. So, but now, let's say, so what happened with this is that, let's say there is this open config consortium, right? Because the ITF is a little bit bureaucratic, we may say. What do you think, Job? Is it a little bit, right? It's terrible. Job says it's terrible. So it is a little bit like that, and I agree to that fully. And so what happened is that a few well-known providers, OTTs, and operators around the world, they made a consortium called this Open Config. Then you can go over there, and you can see there is the Google, the Facebook, AT&T, BT, Microsoft, and things like that, right? So, but so definitely we are in the field of options here. So what I wonder and what I pose as a question, so is this really the way to counter the bureaucracy of ITF, right? So the thing that we always say that, the vendors go at ITF, they decide the standards, and then these standards, they all fall onto us operators, let's say, or, internet persons in general. So is this really the way? Because a different way, and could be also that you participate more, or even though Job may disagree with me in saying that the large community's effort is a very scoped work, and there was a need, and there was the right astral conjunction, right, to make it happen. I mean, look at what Job did. I mean, he's making large communities happen in a very short time for ITF, right? So we have alternatives and possibilities. So is this really the way to make a consortium parallel to ITF to do stuff that ITF is slow? I'm not really sure. So I drop the question onto you. And so let's still continue building on this, right? So the plot thickens a little bit, because now consider a few of the names that are, in this first bullet point, right? So let's connect with my first sentence, that is the data is being standardized, but all the ancillary mechanisms are not being standardized. Then you read a little bit of this stuff: gRPC, netconf, RESTconf, JSON, Google protobuffer, Apache, Avro, Thrift, right? So what is, in your opinion, the chance that Facebook will use Google protobuffers? Or what is the chance that, let's say, Thrift will be used by Google? Or what is the chance that gRPC will be used by Facebook yet again? And and things like that. So things are a little bit complicated when you start putting, software, people that really ship a lot of software in the same consortium, right? So we have also one fun fact over here, and I mentioned, because if you see at the implementation of streaming telemetry at the existing one, like Arista, Cisco, Juniper, I mean, they are all very hot on, going in the Google protobuffer direction, right? But let's remember just one thing here. So how Google protobuffer works, it works in a way that, let's say you have a definition, a schema, a so-called proto file, and this file is compiled with the Google compiler, and then you should really include this source file for the encoding and decoding into your software, right? So I bet that this is a great solution, the Google protobuffer inside Google, for shipping data around the different corners of the organization. But here we speak by definition about, a vendor, a router vendor, a collector, software guy, and an operator. So you have at least 3 parties in here. So what happens to this data? What happens to this code? Who owns it? What is the license, right? It's not clear. And I think we went a little bit too quick in just one direction. And, we then get back to the consortium thing. Is it correct that a few people unionize in a consortium and they go parallel to ITF? And then we have also a quote from the industry from my very good friend David Barroso, right, who has concerns that essentially this can turn into the SNMP MIBs of, the 21st century. So, and all of this that I'm telling you, like it's still with those few hands, raised, right? So we have really, we are, there is something going on in here. There is already problems on the horizon, and still, there is little adoption. Then what will happen when there will be true and real adoption? So now I do, as part of my rant, this question, right, which is this. So how is a peaceful gathering of vendors, right, so like ITF, right? So how is it different, like in wars, right, than, an operator's working group and consortium, right? Is it not a little bit that we are just, moving problems around, right? So we are, trying to solve the ITF problem, and we are creating a new one, right? And let's consider, why I also post this, right? Because in one consortium you have two big, software vendors like Google and Facebook. But let's also remember that, those are people with, big bags of money, right? And so what happens when these people with the big bags of money, they just decide on something incomplete, maybe not the best decision ever, and things like that, and then they go to a vendor or to all the vendors, right? So like this, so the vendor, what the vendor will do, will say, okay, you have the money, you rule, you won, right? And so is that really, the way? So are we not creating a new problem? So ending one or trying to solve one and creating in parallel a different one. So I think that streaming telemetry has a great potential, so don't get me wrong. I mean, I think we are going in the right direction. But so the concluding question that is, the sum of all my rant and all my slides is really who is benefiting from fragmentation. So you remember that gRPC, RESTconf, NetConf, all the serialization methods and things like that. So I believe that, okay, let's say we don't care about the vendors, right? But we as users or operators or smaller operators than Facebook and Google, we are totally not, benefiting from this fragmentation. And let's not absolutely fall into that very, common comment that I hear a lot today, that, we have abstractions, we have APIs, right? So I mentioned SDN and now APIs as well. So I'm, rocking the stage. So, but so let's not take abstraction as an excuse, because abstraction is already a way in which we are solving legacy problems, like when we had the CLIs, we had to log into the routers and things like that. So we are solving with abstraction those problems. So let's not create new stuff and say that, yeah, we can abstract, so who cares? Let's not standardize things. So this is the end of my rant. And then I leave with plenty of information about PMSCCT if you want to know more about it. And thanks very much, and any questions? Perfect. That's how I like it. Fleeing.
Thank you very much. Okay, next one on is Job Schneiders with large BGP communities.